In Los Angeles, humiliation isn't an accident. It's a curated experience with valet parking. Victor Lang thought he'd storyboarded the end of his ex-wife's relevance. New fiancée, bigger ring, louder friends, a PR calendar so tight it squeaked. He deconvinced himself that he didn't know Merlot so much as he missed the way she made him look. The difference had become his favorite lie. Harrington and Hawley on North Camden Drive smelled as it always did. Furniture polish and old money with a top note of ambition. Gold papered the catalogs. The walls were hushed by paintings that had already outlived better people. Elena sat alone in row J in a midnight blue sheath, her hair pinned up in a way that said practical before it said pretty. She had the composure of someone who weathered a storm and learned that silence is a sail if you know where to stand. She had loved this room once. The thrum, the velvet-knuckled competitiveness, the way the gavel could transform air into destiny. Now the same room felt like a taxidermy diorama, wealth arranged into lifelike poses. She watched the glittering birds of paradise preen and hashtag one another. Their laughter was jewelry. For 5 years, she had been Mrs. Victor Lang, a surname like a master key. She never had to raise her voice. Doors did that for her. Now she was Elena again, the name on the spine of library books from a childhood in Santa Barbara, a surname chosen by her mother because it belonged to no man. She rolled the syllables inside her mouth sometimes just to taste the ownership. Across the aisle, Victor performed. He had a voice that filled a room without requesting consent, and a smile that came with battery life. On his arm, Sienna Bloom, 26, an influencer whose content was mostly her face and whose face was mostly content. She wore a scarlet slip that could be mistaken for confidence and a diamond that could threaten pilots. Victor angled her left hand under the chandelier as if he were launching a product. Sienna giggled like something shaken. Elena pretended the catalog in her lap required her entire nervous system. Lot 37. Private letters from Sylvia Plath to Anne Sexton, notebooks of heat and clarity that cut. She knew the phrases by rumor the way a sailor knows currents by color. The letters had been her white whale for years, a correspondence between two minds who burned and survived long enough to write it down. During the marriage, Victor had preferred statement pieces, canvases that shouted their value through square footage. He never understood that paper can whisper you awake. The bidding began like polite applause. 200. 220. Elena lifted her paddle with a hand steadier than she felt. A man with a lacquered ponytail lunged for 250, and she countered before the air could cool. 300. The room leaned in. Champagne paused on lips. Phones hovered, half-raised, because culture is now a sport and sports must be filmed. 340. Ponytail said in a tone you used on Uber drivers. Elena held the silence a heartbeat longer than he expected, and then 360. He hesitated, calculation visible the way guilt is visible on bad actors. Sold, began the auctioneer, Derek Ellsworth, who'd known Elena and Victor as a couple back when their public affection had not yet curdled into theater. 380, Victor said, not bothering to look at the stage. He stared directly across the room at Elena, the corners of his mouth curling like quotation marks around a well-practiced insult. Sienna's laugh tinkled, and 10 phones finished their arc to record position. Elena felt the room telescope. It wasn't about paper anymore. It was the old game. Break her in public so she'll thank you in private for letting her stand. She counted her savings by instinct, then counted something else, her breath. 400, she said, the number landing like a stone, skipping in perfect, impossible arcs. Victor nodded, a gesture that made Derek's jaw flex. 450 to Mr. Lang, the auctioneer announced, apology riding shotgun. Elena's hand relaxed around the paddle. In that loosened grip, something broke not her. The habit. She let the quiet stretch. Then she set the paddle down. Sold, Derek said, his gavel falling with a complicated kind of mercy. A polite smatter of applause. Content captured. Comments incoming. Victor pulled Sienna into a kiss designed for optics and succeeded. Several cameras chirped. Elena stood, smoothing her dress with unhurried hands. She walked out of the aisle, not a flinch, not a glance. Not one breadcrumb for the wolves. The door at the back of the room swung open and let in the noise of the street. Victor lifted the letters of victory he could hold and discovered that the weight felt off. Across the emptying room, Derek watched Elena go and thought, not for the first time, that auctions reveal character more reliably than wills. Out on the sidewalk, the city breathed different air. Elena inhaled like someone released. The sky over Beverly Hills was too bright, too warm, too something. She watched an Uber driver argue with a meter maid about an invisible rule and felt, unexpectedly, tenderness for everyone doing their job. She texted one word to the only person who'd understand what she meant, London. The reply came back before the bubble finished its expand collapse. Wheels up soon. Bring nothing you don't love. Elena smiled into the screen and then at nobody, because that was allowed again. 2 days later at Van Nuys, the tarmac glittered with privately financed hubris. Jets lined up like pearls in a box that belonged to the kind of woman who didn't own jewelry. Elena stood near the signature terminal in travel clothes that read as anonymous until you noticed the cut. Cream cashmere, black trousers, sneakers that were either a thrift store miracle or a limited drop, one scuffed leather carry-on by her ankle. Her hair was down because she liked to feel it move when the plane accelerated. A Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up as if gliding were a billable skill. The driver hurried. The door opened. Victor exited, Sienna trailing in a coat that should have filed a heat complaint. Victor's surprise was an insult to actors everywhere. Elena. Look at this, he boomed, as if he were narrating a nature documentary about coincidence. Victor. She kept her tone flat enough to skate on. Off somewhere? His eyes dropped to the single suitcase, the value judgment unboxed. London. Ah, yes. Still curating the dust, he said, fluttering his hand the way people do when they don't know the work, but assume it has no weight. Then he performed courtesy like an encore. Darling, my ex-wife, Elena. Elena, my fiancée, Sienna. Sienna extended her left hand the way one offers a relic to pilgrims. The ring was audacious, more small planet than stone. I'm sure he has told you. Something, Elena said, and gave Sienna the dignity of a direct gaze and no inventory of the diamond. We're doing a little decompression in St. Kitts, Victor continued, before the wedding. The stress is biblical. You know how a 6-tier cake can cause geopolitical instability. He laughed. It sounded like power lines in wind. He gestured toward a Bombardier Global lounging a few hundred yards away, its paint job aggressively respectable. Commercial for you? That's brave. Something like that, Elena said, and then the air changed. A low hum carried a promise. The Gulfstream G800 slipped into view the way a knife slips into silk. Its pearl fuselage held the sun in its skin and returned it as a rumor. The winglets were rigged like the dangerous part of a bird. It rolled to a stop as if choreographed to her heartbeat. The door opened with a hydraulic whisper. The flight attendant at the top of the stairs had a voice that could talk a person down from anything. Ms. Marlowe, we're ready for you. For a breath, no one said anything. The tarmac smelled like heat and money, and, for once, surprise. Victor's smile stalled. Sienna's hand tightened on his arm. The diamond did nothing to the daylight. It was nice to see you both, Elena said, and it wasn't a barb. It was a boundary. Enjoy St. Kitts. She lifted her bag and climbed the stairs. Inside, the cabin answered with quiet. Not absence intention. No gold, no mirrors pretending to be light. Just soft ash seating, cream leather, walnut that commandeered the sun like a gentleman. A vase with 3 white ranunculus that would be changed in London before they only suggested death. A throw folded with military precision and domestic love. Adrian Vale walked in from the forward galley with a glass of water that had a lemon slice floating like punctuation. His suit wasn't a costume. It was architecture. His hair was dark and interrupted by silver that read more as experience than surrender. His eyes were the color of Pacific at morning. "I almost sent the co-pilot out with a popcorn bowl," he said, the corner of his mouth thinking about the idea of a grin. "I would have taken a handful," Elena said, and felt her jaw unclench. The tightness so familiar she had thought it was bone. They sat across from each other, their knees nearly touching because the plane allowed for intimacy without requiring it. "How are your letters?" he asked, a casualness that was practiced to be kind, lost to a man who doesn't read. "Then they were never yours," Adrian said, not as consolation but as a statement of physics. Sometimes letting go is the most precise strike. He asked about London, which dealers she wanted to find, which panels were worth staying awake for. He knew the names. He knew the work. He knew the cafe on Store Street, whose owner had invented a way to steam milk that could qualify as performance art. He listened like someone who expected to change his mind when presented with evidence. Above the city, the G800 arrowed east. Elena watched Los Angeles shrink, its glitter folding in on itself like foil. She had met Adrian months ago at Skylight Books, both reaching for a first edition of Mrs. Dalloway. He had deferred with a small bow and bought the paperback anyway. They talked in the aisle for 90 minutes about POV as ethics. Comedy that cares, the way grief can teach you to taste texture. Only later, after a series of dinners that felt like remembering rather than inventing, did the mapping occur. Ethon systems, government contracts without headlines, academic citations in journals people keep and never post. A net worth measured in the unit, why would you ask? A man rich in a way that made other rich men audition. He wore his privacy like oxygen. He wore his attention like a gift with no return address. Back on the ramp, Victor watched the G800 like a man learning new math. He had seen the discreet AV stamp near the tail. Not least. Owned. He knew the number to the first order of magnitude. For the second, you'd have to mix in taste. For the first time in his adult life, he felt the difference between possession and power. The sound in his ears, high and insistent, was not the engine. It was panic. It's Giving Consequences, Episode 1. Los Angeles metabolizes gossip faster than it metabolizes juice cleanses. Before Elena's plane crossed Nevada, TikTok had taken the Van Nuys footage and added captions in fonts that felt like moral judgments. When he brings a ring, but you bring a runway. Main character energy detected. Jet greater than gem. Do the math. Victor felt none of it until he felt all of it. He called Sal Moretti, whose voice had New York built into it like steel. Tail logo AVGAOO. I want the owner yesterday. That's a short guest list, Sal said. Confirm you want to step on that rake. Stomp on it twice. 2 days later, Sal called from a number that never stayed saved. Ethon Systems. Beneficial owner, Adrian Vale. Never heard of him. That's the point. Data security. A stack that sells to governments who don't do press releases unless it helps ******* budget. The guy lives under the sentence, sources familiar with the matter. Net worth looks like a typo. Ballpark. If I say it out loud, your phone might burst into flames. Figure low 30s with a B. Victor miscalculated his grip on a glass. It shattered. Sienna's shriek laughed and tilted her ring out of harm's way. He told himself it was the ice. There's more, Sal said, waited. A Vale Foundation quietly acquired the Raven Press archives, letters, manuscripts, first editions. A traveling collection is being built out. Rumor places the anchor in Los Angeles. Victor's mouth went dry. Harrington and hallway suddenly felt like a farce in which he had been cast as comic relief. He had fought to buy Alona a page. Vale had bought her a library. It wasn't about money. It was about fluency. Meanwhile, below sensible headlines, Elena and Adrian built a private grammar. London was a blur of damp weather and dry wit, dealers who tried to sell her provenance with a side of story, a panel where she inhaled a sentence from a scholar and exhaled a grant proposal in her mind while Adrian squeezed her hand under the table, reading something entirely different in her jawline than the room did. They ate at tiny places where the chef could step out and talk about bitterness like it was a relative. They walked along the Thames at night and talked about middle school his in Portland, hers and Santa Barbara, the teachers who had lifted and the ones who had mistaken quiet for lack. They sent late-night photos of book stacks to each other from opposite ends of the suite to make the distance funny. Back in Ellie, the Academy Museum gala approached with the inevitability of tax season. Victor and Sienna rehearsed their entrance in their kitchen the way people rehearse truth in therapy, reluctantly, performatively, clumsily. Sienna worried about her angles like they were endangered. Victor worried about the placement of his chair like it could salt the earth. The night they rolled onto Wilshire in choreography. Sienna wore a crimson column dress that could have doubled as a fire hazard and smiled like a paycheck. Victor wore a tux that was 2 sizes too smug. The cameras flashed, and he bathed himself in the violence of light. Inside, the great hall looked like a rendering. Angels of glass, planes of sound, a crowd so saturated with names that the air felt expensive. Then the room reoriented itself. Elena and Midnight again, but this time with a slit that whispered rather than shouted, stood near the suspended plane, her hand resting lightly on the rail the way one touches a shoulder in a crowd, with intention, not ownership. Adrian stood beside her, not like a trophy, not like a guard, not like anything, but a man who stands beside a woman he loves, because that is where he belongs. He was not scanning for cameras. He was scanning for her smile. The whispers were efficient. "Is that Elena? Who's he?" "That's Vale. No way. He did. He's looking at her like she's a book he hasn't finished. Same." Victor felt the earth tilt an inch. He hated physics for being accurate. In the receiving line, the museum director slid past Victor with a kind of apology reserved for people you may someday need and greeted Adrian like an old promise. "You made it," he said, and then to Elena with genuine warmth, "We're so grateful for the new manuscripts and media wing. You've shifted our center of gravity." There were cameras in the room. There were always cameras in the room. Victor smiled while something bled internally. At dinner, the seating chart did to him what money usually did for him. Elena and Adrian at the director's table. Victor and Sienna near a door through which a brigade of waiters performed quiet miracles, nearest to industry, farthest from influence. Sienna posted a bathroom selfie captioned, "If you know, you know." The comments were kind and they weren't. It wasn't a chair. It was a verdict. Victor floated a theory aloud. He is just buying naming rights, and even his own ears didn't believe him. He understood too late that Adrian was not buying a plaque. He was underwriting a future. He was building the thing Elena had loved since she could read, a place for words to matter in public, not just in rooms where they already did. Okay, but make it legacy. By Friday, the receiving line skip had a name, Tablegate. At San Vicente Bungalows, a woman slipped a martini to a friend and announced, "Director's table," and the entire corner rippled with laughter that wasn't kind and wasn't trying to be. At a breakfast on Sunset, a man who once owed Victor a favor pretended not to see him and then pretended to be embarrassed about pretending. Deals became weather. Emails got circling back into oblivion. A merger Victor needed acquired a condition called buyer's board. Marcus Thorne, a man who golfed with senators and believed in the sanctity of plaid, called Victor with soft-voiced regret. "You understand." Victor did. He also did not. The rage came in waves that started as heat and ended as cold. He hired another PI as if more surveillance could equal more control. He diagrammed Elena's life on a whiteboard until the ink stained his fingers. He called it due diligence out loud. Alone, he called it something uglier. His old privileges, names that opened doors. Cash that greased halls performed less effectively than he was willing to admit. Still, he reached a friend on the board of a certain platinum tower in Century City and arranged to be allowed up. He rehearsed lines in the Uber that threatened to sound like love, but were really ownership in costume. The private elevator opened into the penthouse, which managed to be glass and still private, art and still human, expensive and still kind. The soft footfall of a home rather than the hard echo of a stage. The smell of tulips, clean and honest. The view an unrolled scroll of city. Elena stood at a console changing water in a vase. She didn't startle. She did not welcome him. There was a kindness in her face that wasn't for him. It was for herself. "You shouldn't be here," she said, not angry. "Just done." He launched the speech anyway, a thing constructed out of plank and fear. What is this? The jet. The gala. This, he gestured at a skyline that didn't recognize him, performance. "Who are you trying to be?" "The person I am without correction," she said. "It's underrated." And Vale, you think he's different? Men like that, nobody gets to the top being nice. "Kindness isn't a strategy," she said, "but it's not the opposite of competence either." She walked to a clean-lined desk, lifted a leather folder that belonged in a courtroom more than a living room, and laid it open. "You remember the Lane Growth Fund," she said. "Your special purpose vehicle. The one I was too delicate and too busy to understand. That's not. You forged my signature and made me a liable partner. You moved assets while we were negotiating a settlement. And then you used inside information that you got from my father's friend who I trusted because he had helped me when my mother died to front-run a deal." The blood moved out of his face so fast it left a map. "These are copies," she said. "Affidavits. Wire transfers. Timing that is not your friend. The originals live where they belong now." He understood. He also didn't, because the person he had hired to be was not supposed to find himself in this plot. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, and to his horror, it sounded like a plea. "You wanted me small," she said, "so this is me at scale." From the hallway came a soft chime. "The elevator ready to return him to gravity. The doorman will show you out." She turned back to the window, not a triumph, not a pose. An ending, clean, like a suture. In the elevator, his reflection looked like a man who had confused applause for forgiveness for too long. The ride down was too smooth for the way his stomach dropped. When the doors opened, the lobby air felt colder than California allows. Outside, traffic didn't slow for his shock. It never had. He just hadn't noticed. Investigations move at two speeds, glacial and gossip. The SASEC did the first. LA did the second. The Journal got wind, and then got documents, and then got a series. The headlines arranged themselves like tiles in a bathroom where something had gone wrong with the plumbing. The comments were what comments always are, a Greek chorus with Wi-Fi. Sienna issued a statement that could have been a skincare launch. Irreconcilable differences in personal ethics. Her publicist diversified the portfolio, a podcast about women in tech, a gala for girls who code, a photo spread in which she posed gamely with a keyboard like a passport prop. 2 weeks later, she was on a balcony in Monaco with a man whose title was older than indoor plumbing. The diamond had been a down payment on an education. She'd graduated. Victor's lawyers assembled like a flock, dark suits and lighter advice. The Bombardier went at a price that made him curse math. The Fifth Avenue pied a terre got staged to look like no one had ever bled in it and left at a number that suggested the market was in a mood. He did a podcast a mistake that had looked like control from the inside. The host smiled like a wolf in cashmere and asked, gently, whether Victor felt the culture had misunderstood his journey. Victor attempted to narrate his innocence, but the internet has a lie detector called context. The clip where he said, "It was a clerical error," did 15 million views with duets of accountants rolling their eyes in harmonic minor. Meanwhile, Elena's life grew quietly luxurious in ways that don't photograph well. She went to therapy on Mondays with a woman who wore linen and shoes that cost less than the copay. She learned to say no without explanation. She blocked numbers and did not unblock them. She slept. She and Adrian practiced a domesticity that looked like consent. They cooked if slicing figs counts and burned nothing. Some nights they ordered in and read aloud from different books, pausing to share a sentence the way people share dessert. They argued like editors, not like enemies. They held hands in public not as a performance, but as an agreement. When the London Book Fair's director asked Elena to keynote the following year, she said yes, and then collapsed on the sofa and laughed at herself for 10 unbroken minutes. Adrian watched her like people watch fountains, grateful and quiet. The manuscripts and media wing took shape like a future does, scaffolding and noise and compliments that arrive in emails written by assistants. Elena insisted on a section for contemporary voices in conversation with the historical ones. She hired a curator from a community college in East LA whose syllabi had become legend, and gave her a budget that respected the word curate. She created a fellowship named not for donors, but for librarians. She funded a traveling exhibit that could fit on a bus and did rolling into schools whose libraries had been decommissioned into storage closets. The bus doors folded open like a book. Kids stepped into a space that told them their voices mattered without asking them to prove it first. The night before the wing's opening, Elena and Adrian stood in the empty gallery among display cases that held paper like treasure. The lighting was an art of its own. A plaque near the entrance was smaller than the board would have preferred and more devastating, for every girl who was told her quiet was a flaw. Elena traced the letters with her gaze and felt something unshackle. "It's not revenge," she said, testing the words for truth. "No," Adrian said, looking at her and then at the cases and then back. "It's a map." 6 months after the confrontation in the penthouse, the Aegean unrolled itself like a persuasion. The ataraxia cut a clean path through water so blue it made sky reconsider its identity. The name, Greek for untroubledness, would have sounded pretentious if anyone else had chosen it. From Adrian, it landed like a dare to the universe and a gift to Elena's nervous system. They woke to wind and coffee and sailcloth whisper. They read in the shade while the boat rode its line across long, gleaming afternoons. At night, they lay under bruised purple skies and tried to name the constellations without asking the app. They got some wrong and were happy anyway. He could secure them privately, immediately, forever. Elena held her breath out of habit, then let it go. She remembered the ache the letters had once represented, the hunger to hold a proof of mind in a life that had treated her mind like an accessory. The ache wasn't there. Not like that. "Tell him thank you," she said, smiling with her entire face. "And tell him I have what I came for." Adrian brought up a tray with 2 glasses of white wine and a plate of figs and manchego, and something that tasted like sun distilled. On the tray, a small navy leather book with no title and an embossed M in the corner. She opened it. Inside, in handwriting she had never seen fail to make her heart stutter, were pages labeled notes on meeting Elena Marlowe and everything that followed. Observations, jokes, lines copied and argued with, a record, a receipt, a love letter that never pretended to be anything else. A week after the bookstore, She talks about books like old friends and about old friends like stories we're still editing. Her quiet is not absence, it's voltage. 3 months in, she believes in libraries the way other people believe in resurrection. The day of Van Nuys. I have never been so proud to be furniture as when I watched her walk up those stairs. Elena cried in a way that asked nothing of anyone else. Adrian watched, helpless and happy in the way of men who have finally figured out that they cannot fix what has us broken. I don't need to buy someone else's love letters, she said, wiping at her cheek with the back of her hand. Inelegant and beloved. I have mine. Say less, he murmured and did. Cities move on, they also remember. The story of the jet and the ring and the seating chart and the plaque turned into folklore with better styling. Hash. Quiet Texit trended for a week and then lived on as shorthand among women who upgraded their boundaries rather than their phones. A therapist in Silver Lake posted a carousel titled What Elena Did Right and How You Might Too, and comment sections became group therapy until someone posted a dog video and peace returned to the room. Victor did not disappear. Men like that don't vanish. They downgrade. He could be seen at restaurants where he used to own the corner table, telling too loud stories to two tired friends, laughing at his own jokes like they were trying to escape. He claimed he was writing a book, and perhaps he was. It would sell to the people who needed it to justify their own plot lines. He began attending a church in Brentwood for 3 consecutive Sundays, which was 2 more than anyone expected, and shook the pastor's hand with the persistence of a man auditioning for absolution. Sienna's rebrand ethics and empowerment landed where rebrands tend to: 1 part earnest, 2 parts algorithm. Her Monaco prince turned out to be a marquis of something. The title dazzled and then bored her. She launched a podcast and interviewed women who actually wrote code. The comments were kinder than she deserved. Perhaps that is the point of mercy. Derek Ellsworth retired to a smaller house with a larger garden and taught a seminar once a year at UCLA, titled Value and Valuation. What they done. Teach you about want. He began each course by holding up a blank piece of paper and a diamond ring and asking, "Which will you remember?" The semester went well. Sal Moretti took his wife to Italy with a bonus Victor never paid him. He sat on a stone wall in a hill town and decided to retire. He did one last job for a woman who apologized for every question and paid him early. He cried about it into a napkin at lunch and told the waiter he was allergic to something. The manuscripts and media wing opened with less fanfare than expected and more joy. Teenagers came drawn by a bus tour and a hashtag, and the rumor of a space that might not condescend and stood in front of a case, holding a zine stapled in 1997 by a girl who had not known she was allowed to be a poet. They took pictures and then put their phones down and ran. Elena gave a talk and did not swallow her voice. She told a story about a librarian who had let her sit behind the desk one afternoon in 5th grade and stamp the due dates. She said that power comes in many flavors, and not all of them are spicy. She said that the opposite of humiliation is not pride, it's dignity. The plaque by the entrance did its work on people who needed to see it and on some who didn't know they did. A girl touched the letters with 2 fingers like they might transfer. Elena went home to a kitchen that didn't touch late meals and cooked nothing while Adrian actually cooked something which should be recorded for balance. They ate, and afterward he read her a paragraph he'd been working on for weeks. It wasn't good. She laughed the laugh of someone safe, and he laughed with her, perfectly untalented together in that tiny, holy way. They didn't check their phones for the rest of the night, not because they were virtuous, but because they were busy. If you need a moral, take this one. The quietest exit can be the loudest statement, but it's only the overture. The music that matters happens backstage, unfilmed, in kitchens and libraries and rooms with views that you can't buy because you have to build them. If you're waiting for permission, here it is. Pick up your bag, the one with scuffs you earned. Walk toward the stairs, whatever they are. Don't look back. You don't have to make a scene to change it. It's giving new beginning.